On today's episode of MULTIPULM Voices, we are continuing our Women in Science series with three remarkable women who are shaping how science reaches people, not just papers. Welcome to MULTIPULM Voices. I am your host, Chris Aguilar, and this is where research meets real-world care. MULTIPULM is a Horizon Europe project working on accessible integrated care for people with multiple chronic conditions in low and middle income countries, specifically Brazil, Serbia, and Turkey. Throughout the month of February, in recognition of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, we're launching our Women in Science podcast series, where we spotlight women shaping integrated ethical and implementable science. This series is about visibility, ownership, and leadership, because the future of integrated care is being built by both men and women's voices deserve to be heard. Let's give a warm welcome to Carina Dantas, Miriam Cabrita, and Inês Saavedra. It is a pleasure welcoming the three of you to our show. To get us started, could you tell our listeners a bit about yourself and your role within MULTIPULM?
My name is Inês Saavedra. I'm Portuguese living in Portugal, and I work as a project manager at Giant Europe. I have a master's in physics and another one in adult education and community intervention. And I've been working on European projects for more than 5 years now across different fields such as gender, sustainability, aging, health. But across all these areas, my main focus has been mainly on inclusion, approached from an intersectional perspective. And I've been also working with participatory methodologies. And in MULTIPULM, I try to bring this experience to help to identify which stakeholders can be involved, how they should be engaged to enable implementation, and also I will contribute to networking and clustering activities.
I'm Carina Dantas, as said, also Portuguese as the rest of my colleagues. I'm the CEO and managing partner of Giant Europe, one of MULTIPULM partners. Personally, I've been working in several different things, usually ranging international projects, but mostly connecting this idea that we need to take research into implementation. We need to hear all of the voices of people around us, and we need to try to foster some more ethical and equitable implementation of digital solutions. So MULTIPULM is really very much gathering all of this, because on top of the rest, we don't work only in Europe. We also work with other middle-income countries, namely with Brazil, which speaks Portuguese, same as us. So it's a really nice addition. At Shine, besides being the CEO, I'm also the chief investigator and in MULTIPULM, because, as I said, it's a really enthusiastic project. I've also been doing some research work with our colleagues, especially on the part of understanding how to adapt personas to different settings and cultural contexts, and also how to make the most of networking with other projects and organizations that are related to our area of work.
So my name is Miriam Cabrita. I have a background in biomedical engineering. I'm representing the technical sciences in the group, and a PhD in digital health for health promotion. So since my PhD research and academic research, I was always interested in the role of technology in health promotion. So that has been my focus, especially making sure that all voices are heard. So, of course, this podcast speaks also very much to my heart, because women's voice should also be heard in the innovation and in the innovation process. I'm a research director at Giant Europe, and in MULTIPULM, I'm the principal investigator and working on a daily basis in the project, supervising the work from Shine's side.
Shine's work keeps the project grounded in people and context and real-life implementation. So let's start with what pulled you into this field. What drew you personally to work on chronic respiratory multimorbidity and integrated care? Miriam, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I said, so I am a biomedical engineer, and always health technology has been my passion since the beginning. And I was lucky enough to start my master and then doing my PhD in the research department of a rehabilitation center. My core focus was always the promotion of daily physical activity. And I was always very much aware of how, and I'm not talking about exercise, but how physical activity, the fact that you can move around, that you can do your activities, has an influence in people's lives. And one of our core group of interest was COPD, that of course is chronic respiratory disease. So for many years, let's say 8 to 10 years, I've worked on the role of digital health in the promotion and management of daily physical activity, also with people with COPD.
Sounds like you're a perfect fit for the project, Miriam.
The project is a perfect fit for me. We met each other. We found each other.
Perfect. That's a great starting point because it's about helping people live better, right? Not just treating a diagnosis. Was there a moment in your career where being a woman shaped your scientific journey positively or negatively?
I think that actually I was very fortunate because I don't really think that I got any moment where I really felt discriminated based on gender, which I know is not the true reality for a lot of people, not only in Europe, but also outside of Europe. But I actually didn't felt it. However, I think it would be also not fair if I don't recognize that being a woman is really a key part of all of my career, not only of my personal life, but also of the professional way of work. Any decision, perspective, way of communicating, even the way that Shine is managed when I am closer. This is, of course, very much shaped because I'm a woman. And this is not inherently positive or negative. It is as it is, but it is something that I'm proud of because unfortunately we still don't have enough women in leadership positions. At Shine, we actually do in several different ways. This is, of course, a reason of pride to us.
Yeah, it's refreshing to see how Shine is breaking the mold and putting women in the forefront and making an impact. Miriam, I would love to hear from you as well.
Thinking about this question, there are 2 points. The same as Carina, there is not a defining or tipping point that I would say. But for me, so I started more from the technical sciences and moved to the social sciences. And there is a huge difference, let's be honest. I have the feeling, and there's where I started also, of course, you can say that is early career, maturity, everything. But in the technical sciences, I really always have the feeling you need to prove yourself as a woman. You need to say something smart. And then I was lucky enough, the moment, okay, say something smart, you are at the same level. But you need to do that. While in the social sciences, and this, of course, is a generalization with the pros and cons of any generalization, you start as equal. And that already changes a lot how you enter a room, how you approach a conversation. And then there is a second point that I need to talk about, that is motherhood. And especially, I don't feel that so much in Shine, because of course we do research, but we don't have that publish or perish mentality. But for many years, I was strongly connected to academia, and this whole mentality of the publications has a huge impact, because let's start with pregnancy. You have to be away, even if it's for a couple of weeks. And normally, okay, thinking that you are pregnant when you are, or your first child, early career researcher, that was my case, you just stop. No one will collect data for you. No one will put your name because you are the head of the department, so your name will be on the paper. So basically, all publications stop. And that has a huge impact compared to your male friends. And by no means pregnancy, having kids, best thing in the world, but it has an impact. And then when it doesn't stop there, and I think that's where it should be, we should acknowledge and give much more credit, because, okay, the pregnancy or the first postpartum, you are some time away, but you come back and you are not the same. And with a huge kudos to the new generation of parents, of fathers, that are breaking the cycle and are doing great. I have great examples around me, but still sharing household activities is not the same as sharing cognitive mental load. And as we know, especially if you go higher in your career, you take a lot of management tasks. So your days are with management, with teaching. If you are at university, writing articles comes when? Your free time. We all know that is what happened. You're free. But in your free time, you have the cognitive load of vaccination, of medical appointments, school, birthday parties, everything. It has really a huge impact. It's really different, especially in academia, to be, in this case, mother. And of course, there are fathers who have the same, especially single fathers. No, but in general, if I need to give a generalization, I think motherhood has a huge impact in the scientific academic journey, how it is right now.
Thank you so
Sorry
much,
for the long
Miriam.
answer.
No, great. It's great. That's what we like. Thank you so much, Miriam. It's wonderful to hear these different perspectives, and you've touched on a lot of very interesting topics that I think we might be echoing a bit later on in our interview. But I appreciate you bringing this to our audience. I think a lot of women and men as well maybe will agree with you and say, yes, this resonates with me. I would love to also hear from you, Inez, and hear a bit of what your experience has been.
I think that in my case, I have different experiences if I consider when I was in physics and now that I'm more connected to social sciences and humanities. So when I was in physics, I was mainly, I think I was the only girl when I was studying in my master's, for example. I had another ones, but they were from a different branch. And the thing is that there were still this kind of stereotype that somehow, because the history led men to be the best well-known researchers or scientists, that we still had to prove ourselves, as Miriam said, and we had to prove a lot, work perhaps much more. I think in social sciences, it's perhaps a little bit different, my experience at least. However, I do think that the age is something to very important in this case. For me, I definitely felt that when I was a bit younger, perhaps with little less white hairs or something, that people would perhaps hear with a more concrete and experience the men and not perhaps the women as equally. So I think something that I take with myself, at least right now, I think it's mainly to try to be perhaps a bit more assertive and not be afraid of saying, okay, I have a voice and I can speak for myself.
Thank you, Ines. And yes, we do want to hear what you have to say, and it goes well with the name of our podcast, Multiple Voices. So thank you, ladies, for naming that so clearly. What you're describing isn't just personal, it really shapes who gets heard, what gets built, and what gets prioritized. So building on that, do you think women approach problem solving in health research differently, especially in complex contexts like low to middle income countries?
Yeah, again, being afraid of generalization, but having to do that, I think indeed. And I think I would start by saying it's not better, it's just different. And exactly, Chris, as you started the intro of the podcast saying how male and female are shaping the implementation. So we need both. And I think the side that women bring in general, again, different than men, is this caring, this capacity. Is really in our inner, on most women, to have this caring, to understand not just the problem solution, but go to the root case, to understand what is there, how can I make different, how can I support, what sometimes is not the most efficient. It can be the most rational choice if we put all the conditions, of course, and that's where I think a logical brain works better. But to also read between the lines. I think in general, women can read between the lines better, especially when we look at these complex contexts in the low and middle income countries.
Thank you for that, Miriam. You make wonderful points. And as we can see, you mentioned, I think, empathy, and this can be a big strength. It can also become a bit of an expectation, right? To name it directly, what kind of barriers are there for women in science today that you think we don't talk about enough?
I think it's on the side quite difficult to make it general because I see huge differences between countries. This has a very clear cultural part as well. And at the same time, of course, men and women are not close categories. So I know several men that have different sets of characteristics, and the same for women. In any case, it's impossible to repeat that the conciliation between personal and professional life is possibly one of the main issues now. Although I would refrain from calling it a barrier. In general, I think that the barrier is the lack of adaptation of the system to people's well-being. So it shouldn't be the fact that you are a man or a woman, that, for example, you experience motherhood or taking care of your parents, which now happens more and more at the same time. That should be a barrier. Not for women and neither for men when they are the ones actually doing this. The fact is that the system can adapt to you, and you can do this if you have enough interest and availability to transform the way organizations work.
I actually agree a lot with what Carina said, because I think there are this part also that Miriam mentioned about motherhood, but also about these care responsibilities that can be, for example, for a family member. And of course, in an aging society, this is more and more often will be our situation. So I definitely think that institutions, organizations should start thinking on these and how can provide better conditions for the workers, because otherwise it's very hard to handle all of these chores that we have, all of these responsibilities, without having a huge burden, which is often the case. And of course, we know that women have a tendency in our society to be the main caregivers, whether for the children or the older adults.
Thank you for putting that into words. It's both a challenge and a reality that many people, and especially women, are carrying quietly while still being expected to compete at the same pace as men. And this really connects directly to our next theme, because health innovation only works when it respects real lives, real schedules, real people. How would you say your work helps make sure innovation doesn't stay in the lab, but actually reaches these patients and families?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is really the core, the essence of Shine. That's what we do, and this is our great mission. There are, of course, many ways to do this. I'll just mention two, and then, of course, open to Inês and Carina to comment on it. I think one of them is about engagement and early engagement, research with and not for people. So from day one, and even before starting, before getting the project accepted, when you are designing your project, when you are designing your proposal, when you are thinking about it, engage with, and we are talking about patients and families, actually all the stakeholders that are relevant. If we are talking about health innovation for children, engage the schools also. If we are talking about older adults, let's say in Portugal, that communities and neighborhoods, especially in more rural areas, still have a very strong impact, engage the day center. For example, first point, start with the stakeholder analysis. That's one of the tasks that we are doing in MULTIPULM, just making the circle, bringing back to MULTIPULM, and then engage in a way that is understandable and that is meaningful, not just asking from people, but also giving back. And then the second, of course, to close once the research is done, or also throughout the process, not when research is done, but throughout the process, communicate in a way that is understandable. Talk the language of the people, whatever it is. How you communicate again to a child is not the same way you communicate to a professor of a university. So adapt your language, make things understandable, invest time on it, and not just, oh, here is the scientific article, or I will make a short abstract and that's it, because in the short abstract, there is only a part of the message.
That is so key. You really need to know who you're speaking to, otherwise you're putting everything into a void, right? And it's about designing with people in mind so that you can make more of an impact and your communication can really travel and go further. Here's the flip side now. Which risks would you say we face with health innovation if it ignores social, cultural, and gender dimensions?
Very often, the issue is that in research, we forget the reason for research. I know, of course, this is open for discussion, and this is my personal view. But for me, research always needs to have a purpose, a defined one, which is providing good to society. The reason, the overall teleological mission of research is to doing something good for society. And of course, this can be, of course, increasing knowledge or doing something more applied. I don't discuss this, but it needs to have this final purpose. And very often we tend to forget it. Sometimes all of us, because we are so busy that at a certain point we are just looking for the low-hanging fruits and the small win-wins and we forget about it. And other times, unfortunately, because other things come in the middle, such as money, visibility, or any other competition, whatever. But I do think that if we keep this in mind, if we really consider that science needs to bring something to society, then we acknowledge that this is, let's say, the major risk to overcome. Once you accept this, you understand that if you want to provide something to society, then you need to involve society in research, which is one main gap that we are still struggling to have. You need to have everyone concerned, which is the stakeholder engagement that Miriam discussed, bringing their views and inputs from the beginning, because otherwise nothing will then be useful. And if it's not useful, it's not good. And I think this is a main message. And third, because people need to understand what they are being offered. And very often we were lost in the process, as I was saying, very busy. And then something comes up and people are not expecting it and they are not ready to accept and embed and feel grateful for this new innovation. And it just brings discussions and chaos without any need. So we need to make this into the right phase. And if we actually do this, then I think we overcame most of the risks of research getting to the ground. Then we still have the policy side, but I can go there later on.
Thank you, Carina. But you've done a wonderful job of highlighting the different factors that embody science and how this altruistic approach, I completely agree with you. Really, it's about what does science do for the good of humanity, of society. So that's something very good to keep in mind. So thank you for bringing that to the table. It shows us how quickly innovation can turn into exclusion if we're not careful. And that's exactly why inclusion is not just a values conversation, it's also a science and quality conversation, a bit of what Carina and Miriam were mentioning before as well. So let's unpack that a little bit. Why is inclusion a scientific issue, not just a social one?
Inclusion is a scientific issue because we need evidence to really understand what the barriers are and where they came from if we want things to change at the end, if we want a better society ultimately. And many of these barriers are actually structural. They are built into institutions, policies, and even the way research itself is designed. So we have a lot of work to do on all of those things. If we don't study, as you said, social exclusion, for example, or inclusion in a proper way, or if we don't integrate inclusion measures into our research, we end up missing data which may be key for our research. And without that data, we can also develop evidence-based solutions that reflect the diversity that we have on our society and to actually respond to real-world challenges or to even create impact that truly embraces all citizens.
That's a powerful way to put it. Exclusion is missing data, and missing data really weakens the science. So the next question is the how. So in MULTIPULM, how do stakeholder engagement and ethics shape sustainable health innovation?
This is quite relevant also for the part of inclusion that Inês was now pinpointing, because, for example, I was doing the development of the personas with the Brazilian team, and we were talking about a specific persona of an older woman, exactly, Maria, who typically would be someone with a lot of multimorbidities. The care system is still missing possibilities of providing very in-time medication appointments, etc. So at the end, we are talking about people who are not socially excluded, but they are being somehow not fully included in the care system in the best way possible. We are working, I think, as well, very much to promote equity and access to health. I think it's maybe the most ethical need within digital health innovation, is that we really try not to develop thinking of those who are very digitally literate and that can actually access healthcare, for example, from the private sector, but to those who are dependent on public health, that really needs to depend on what exists and is provided by the public sector. And we need to try to make them raise the bar up, I would say, and bring there the minimum acceptable healthcare. And innovation should be the trigger for this, not, as I say, to bring just to bring amazing things, but first to guarantee that everyone has enough to be able to have a healthy life. And again, this is research working for society and how I think we should do it. First goal, promote as much equity as possible.
There you go. To our viewers, or to our listeners, we have an extra bonus, a wonderful masterclass on building personas, on stakeholder mapping. on the importance, but it must be so exciting and interesting to see, really, to put a face and name to the people that we're impacting, right? And really understanding where they're coming from, what's affecting them, and looking at all these different aspects and elements of their day-to-day life. So thank you for sharing that, Karina. But if I can keep you on the microphone for a bit longer, I'm also interested to hear from you. What kind of role do policy and roadmaps play in long-term adoption?
I was actually pointing out the policy a bit earlier exactly because I would say it is one of the weak points. As I was saying before, one of our main roles as Shine is the support to implementation. So we want to make sure that whatever comes out of research projects, for example, is, as Miriam was saying, very nice. Inês, I think, was saying very nice on paper. Yes, we all want things to be very nice on paper, but our real goal is that they reach people and that people can actually use them. And of course, that policymakers are the key element in this translation. And unfortunately, we are lagging very much behind on being able to transfer innovation into implementation for several reasons, but I do think that policy is one of the main reasons. And maybe making it very short and of course biased, I would say for two main points. On one side, because not all researchers understand what they need to provide to policymakers, because they provide very high-level research output sometimes. And this is one of the things that we try to do at Shine, is to transform high-level research outputs into tangible policy awareness outputs, let's say. So things that the policymaker can understand, can quickly grasp on, and can work around. But on the other side as well, policymakers are very often a bit buried under political agendas. This is, again, a structural problem because we have very short policy cycles and people usually go for the short-term, low-hanging fruit. But the truth is that policymakers need to pay more attention to innovation that comes from, in this case, digital health innovation, and understand what can be done. If they have these good summaries from researchers, this would be doable. But of course, this would also mean that policymakers remember that they have a mission, which is to serve the people. So I do hope that we can find a good connection between this mission of serving the people and researchers providing them with things that are easier to implement. And if so, we should be on the good run for implementing digital health innovation, again, in an equitable way.
That's right. Couldn't have been said better, Karina. Thank you so much. Now, as a MULTIPULM project that we're mostly focusing on the low to middle income countries like Brazil, Serbia, and Turkey, and Inês, I would love to hear, what change would you like to see in how science addresses vulnerable populations?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. So I think that one key change, in my opinion, would be to move away from this idea of making things for people and really start making things with them, which is something that we, as was mentioned previously, we do often with participatory methodologies or co-creation, really engage the target audiences with whom we wish to create something. And I think there is already a lot of knowledge on these, for example, in the social sciences and humanities, that can help us do this in a better way. And of course, I recall something that, for example, Miriam shared, the language, how we speak, we need to adapt, right? If whether we are talking to an expert on one field, or if we are talking to someone else that is not necessarily an expert, for example, but something that needs always to be done. And I think most particularly in vulnerable contexts is to respect the people, understand that they have something to share with us, they have knowledge, and they should be actively involved in co-creation solutions, and not just at the end, as I think it was also mentioned, but from the very beginning. And I think this also means that we need to value the time that they spend during these co-creation sessions, for example, their experience, understand how to provide real incentives if possible, and support them in a way so that they can actually fully participate in these processes.
Inês definitely put it brilliantly. I will just give maybe another perspective to bring another side of the issue, more internal with science, with researchers themselves. Because I don't have the solution, of course, but I think we also need to dare to discuss these issues. And what I mean, for example, earlier today, we talked about data, including data, show that there are inequalities, show that there are bias. But to show, you need to be able to collect that data. And we know for very honorable reasons, and each country has own rules but for example, if you ask about ethnicity, if you ask about income, it's very challenging. But if you don't collect the data, you can not show that there is inequalities. And we see now that, for example, in China, we have several projects in the AI in healthcare, artificial intelligence in healthcare. And we want to show that there are bias in the data sets. But if we don't have the data, or if the data is not collected, how can you show? So I think we also need to dare, as science community, to discuss this and to come up with a solution that I don't know, unfortunately, what the solution is, but at least to discuss this. So it's not only about how we approach vulnerable populations and inequalities, but also how do we assess, how do we ask for it in a way that, of course, in any way can compromise the well-being in the broader sense of the word, well-being of the population. But we need data. I know I sound too scientist in this, saying this, but without data, there is no evidence-based policy coming also. So then we go to the policy conversation that Carina was having.
I think the three of you really complement each other very well. You look at different aspects, and together, when you force your powers together, then you get a really nice big picture of what needs to change in society maybe, and what we're doing well and what we can improve on. Really loved this interview with you guys. I think we've touched on so many different topics, and we're getting to see as well what an important role Shine has in the project, and that as being one of the partners from the project, I know that we're in the best hands with the stakeholder and management and with all of this. So really wonderful to hear from the three of you. And now I'd like to go to my favorite section of the interview, because if we want science to get closer to people, we also need more people, especially more girls, to feel like science is for them. So let's end with a message to the next generation. What would you say to a young girl in Brazil or Serbia or Turkey who might be listening to this podcast, who might be considering a career in science?
This sounds very cliche, but I would just say you can. You just need to acknowledge that all of us are supporting, and that if you find a way, you can do whatever you think you want to do. Mostly, I do think that for people either in less privileged contexts or in other countries, it's more a question of self-confidence as well, because very often the context is not helping. So people really need to strive for finding their way. So I would say you can, and we will help.
Perhaps that's to practice your curiosity. If you wish to be a scientist, to try to put a lot of questions as well, and to trust yourself. In the meantime, you are not alone. This is also an ecosystem.
I love that, because it's both honest and encouraging. And before we go to the next question, I would also love to hear from you, Miriam. Do you have anything for those young girls in Serbia, Brazil, or Turkey?
Carina went to the go for it, or you can, and in feed your curiosity and dare to ask. And I would really reinforce this dare to ask, because in any field, whatever it is, there is always a role model there is always a female that can be a role model. And we know the power and the need to have representation, to know that there is someone there. And maybe the most famous names are not female for whatever reason, but there will be someone working on the field. I dare to say that nowadays there is no field where there is no woman. So dare to ask, dare to send that email, dare to send that message on social media. Yeah, okay, I always say the no is guaranteed, and don't expect that you'll get an answer, and then maybe you will, but stay in contact. And if I say this, I also need to really make a call for then the researchers and the senior researchers that answer that email, answer the message from the young girl. it won't contribute maybe in anything for your career, but it can make a difference. I've been lucky enough in my personal and professional life to have 3-4 role models that really from the beginning I knew this is possible. It was never a question for me. So I'm super lucky, but I know that many people don't have that. Please, to be more senior career-wise, I'm not saying age-wise, but just answer that email, engage in mentorship programs. They're amazing mentorship programs for young ladies. Just give this little bit of your time also, and don't ignore that the email from the young researcher in the group or from the high school student.
It might not impact that specific person's career, but it could make a big impact on the science community. And I'm
And you
looking
never
and
know.
You never know.
What goes around comes around.
Goes around. There you go. Yeah, could benefit them in the long run. I'm listening to and seeing 3 wonderful role models for our aspiring young women who are thinking about science and STEM. So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask if there's anything else that you would like to share with our listeners.
I would just like to say that first, I really compliment this initiative from your side, Future Needs and Chris, mostly because as we are in this geopolitical moment where gender, diversity, inclusion, a lot of the things that we said during this full hour are just swear words. Some of them are not even allowed in some countries anymore. And we need to stand up against this. I think this is maybe what I would say none of what we are doing, none of these main goals of bringing good to society will exist if we continue to somehow not follow anymore a search for ethics, for equity, for justice, for inclusion of the youngest, of the frailest. It's very good to be able to discuss this. It's very good that you are still taking a stand and showing up for this. And I'm very proud also of our MULTIPULM project to keep this into the highlights. I think we should all be proud of that. So thank you for this.
Thank you for those kind words, Carina. And it's such a pleasure to work with these great colleagues like you, the 3 of you. And I also want to give credit where it's due. My project manager, Eva, who is an amazing woman leader, was the one that really kickstarted this campaign. So all the credit goes to Eva. She's great, and I fully support this initiative. And I think as a man, I think us men really need to support the women and make sure that these voices are heard. So it's really, for me, it's a pleasure to get to sit with you guys and to hear what you have to say and the impact you're making. And I also agree with you, Carina, about not losing these values. It's so important, especially now with everything that's going on in the world. I can only echo what you said. Carina, Miriam, and Inês, thank you for joining us and for sharing your stories and your work. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And who knows, maybe in the future we will have a podcast for men because the balance has shifted.
You can only hope.
Yeah.
I hope this is the case. I think it's about time. To everyone listening, thank you for being part of this series. If you want to support women shaping integrated care, follow the MULTIPULM podcast. Share this episode with your network and explore MULTIPULM through our website, www.multipulm.eu, as well as our social media channels. See you in the next episode. MULTIPULM is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the author only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Health and Digital Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them.